So, White's novel was adapted into the musical Camelot by Lerner Loewe. So that came out in 1960. 2 years after Once and Future came, the musical Camelot came out. And it's been reproduced and redone many times. First it was, the original performances on Broadway had, Richard Burton as King Arthur. And Julie Andrews played Guinevere. And, gosh, now see, I can't think who played Mordred. But again, it was a incredible cast playing it, and it was redone on stage with Richard Harris as Arthur, which was a subpar production because Richard Harris couldn't sing. But he did a very good job of talking through the lyrics to the music. But you're probably not going to find a film version of the Richard Burton King Arthur, but you'll probably be able to find one of Richard Harris and Vanessa Redgrave as Guinevere. And it's a decent version. Fifth Avenue Theater in Seattle did a production of it a little while back. And I'm sure if you keep your eye out, you'll be able to find references to it. You can certainly find the screenplay or the stage play in a library somewhere. So that was 1960. Then in 1963, Disney puts out The Sword and the Stone. And I don't know how many of you have seen The Sword and the Stone. One of you, two of you? Ah, there's more. Okay, there's more. So that is a terrible adaptation, but it's a fun movie. So, and it just, as you can see, it starts to snowball. 1975, Monty Python parodies King Arthur in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. In 1981, John Boorman puts out the film Excalibur. If you haven't seen Excalibur, you should see Excalibur. And then the following year, Marion Zimmer Bradley publishes Miss Isabel.
Will you talk about what you liked about Excalibur?
What I liked about Excalibur, Excalibur does a very good job of adapting Mallory's story into the Tales of Arthur. Most of what's written in the screenplay of Excalibur is very close to how Mallory wrote the stories of Arthur, back in the 15th century. So, plus that Patrick Stewart.
Did Peter Jackson direct it?
Did Peter Jackson direct that? No, John Boorman for Excalibur. Currently, there are two different retellings of the story of Arthur going on in popular media. You've got a BBC series called Merlin, which is a very radical reimagining where they have Merlin and Arthur both as young men growing up together. And then you have the Starz series Camelot, which just started, and I haven't had a chance to watch that yet, but I have been waiting for me at home to start watching. So if has anybody seen the Starz series? No? Okay, well I will tell you that Merlin will not give you a very good idea of the original stories, but it is kind of a fun read, a fun watch. And so I've watched it pretty regularly. I like Anthony Stewart Head anyway, so he plays Luther. So anyway, that is pretty much how the story of Arthur evolved. I'll take a pause here. And any questions about how Arthur's story evolved and grew and changed? Yes?
Where did the female characters come from? Like Guinevere?
So a lot of those stories probably came out during Mallory's publication. A lot of little bits and pieces were added here and there over years, but the first real significant mentions of Guinevere were in Mallory's work. Anything else about history? Yes?
It's a bit off topic, but I kind of want to hear your thoughts on the Holy Grail.
Okay.
Whether you thought it was like a chalice or if it symbolized something else, or what do you think of that?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of different interpretations of that, right? There's the interpretation of the Holy Grail as a druid relic, or relic of the goddess. Of course, in Mallory's work, the Holy Grail is the cup that Jesus Christ drank from at the Last Supper. And finding the Grail was akin to finding a splinter from the original cross he was crucified on, or the spear of Longinus, holy relics essentially. So I don't think that Mallory's work and the time that Mallory wrote was a pretty simple time. Well, not a simple time. It was during the War of the Roses. It was a way to try and take something very complicated and make it simple. So I don't think Mallory intended the Holy Grail, or I guess ultimately before Mallory, Robert of Burgundy, intended it to be anything symbolic. I think he intended it to be a very literal, this is the cup Christ drank from, and it has great holy significance and has been lost, and is a worthy quest for a bunch of knights to go around chopping people's heads off for. But I think that there can be a lot of interpretation since then about what we would like to see the Holy Grail be. I personally have used the term, and I think other people have as well, heard the term, this is my Holy Grail. This is like, I'm trying to achieve something, get something. The Holy Grail has grown beyond even just the idea of a holy relic as this great achievement that you may never get achieved, but if you do achieve it, then you reach penultimate of your efforts.
So if this is appropriate time, I'd love to hear what you think the either explicit or implied connections are between the Arthurian legend and Christianity.
Well, I think the Arthurian legend definitely embraces Christianity, but I think that Christianity itself is just an understood during most of the tellings, because at this point, much of Europe is completely Christianized, and so the stories of Arthur just acknowledge that God is on Arthur's side, and Arthur is a Christian king, and there's just no questions about that. You have, even the fact that he evangelizes outside of Britain. You have Sir Palamedes the Saracen, who is mentioned. He's a Saracen that becomes a knight of Arthur's court, and embraces Christianity and joins the court that way. So, in the original tales and legends of Arthur, Christianity is just understood as that is just how he would have to be. Was he Christian? He was probably some sort of combination of Christian and pagan, and that is represented pretty well in the Myths of Babylon. And I don't think that if you have any sort of historical basis, he would have to have had some embracings of both. You're talking about a king that's a war leader that's sitting there, in the southern part, south of Hadrian's Wall, in a Roman fort, with a lot of Christianity making inroads. He probably would have to have very much kowtowed to all religions in order to get enough people to follow him to fight a war against the Saxon invasion. So what would you think would make the idea of this very, very barbaric 5th century, 6th century king, war leader, whatever you want to call him, turn into this giant tale of romance and chivalry and all of those things? I don't know that anybody has a real answer, but I think that we can make some pretty educated guesses. But once the Saxons pushed the Britons out and took over, then there was another invasion that followed the Saxons, and that was the Normans. So the Normans come in, and they're pushing the Saxons out, and they need some sort of political propaganda to justify their conquest. And all of a sudden you have this story by Geoffrey of Monmouth about the rightful ruler of Britain fighting the Saxons. So now the Normans have something to latch onto. Okay, so the Saxons aren't the rightful rulers of Britain. This Arthur guy was, and the Saxons pushed him out. So we can push the Saxons out, and we'll just hang on to Britain here until Arthur shows up to take it back. We'll hand over the keys when he shows up. And I think that you can probably see when you look at the timelines that as the popularity of Arthur grows, it's really backed by the Norman invasion. The Normans are all about making sure that the legend of Arthur spreads and vilifies the Saxons as much as possible, because they're pushing the Saxons out and trying to take over. So politically, it makes sense for the Normans to promote the idea of Arthur and romanticize him and make him into a larger-than-life character. That may not necessarily be why Arthur grew as big as he did in terms of the legend, but I think that that he was certainly helped along by the Norman invasion. So, and really, there's so much that's not quite understood or quite figured out yet. There's a lot of debate historically, literarily. Even the name Arthur is not. They don't really know what the origin of the name Arthur comes from. There's a few different possibilities. Artorius is a Roman name. There's no real known etymology of that name. It is a known Roman name. So it could be that Arthur is derived from the Roman name Artorius. But if you look at the Latin texts about Arthur, they all refer to him as either Arthur or Arturus, not Artorius. So that sort of detracts from the possibility that that was the origin of the name. There's also a Britannic, Artorigios, which has its basis in Artorig, which means barricade. And there's one last theory, so these are three theories about the origin of the name Arthur. The last theory is that it is based off of the star Arcturus, which is in the Bootes constellation right near Ursa Major. And in either case, if it's Artorig or Arcturus, the star, both of those, when you bring them into Welsh, could very easily be changed into Arthur. So either one of those is a more likely possibility than that the name is of Roman origin, but nobody really knows. So he asked a little bit, yeah.
Some of the other names that I mentioned in this story is Lancelot, or I can't quite think of any, like Balin, Bowden, and whatnot. Are those all Roman or English?
Most of them are probably Britannic and Celtic. Guinevere is almost assuredly based off of Celtic, especially the way it's spelled. And of course, eventually Guinevere evolved into the name Jennifer.
Oh.
So Camelot. Camelot was pure fabrication. There almost assuredly was not any sort of Camelot with walls and spires and towers and things like that. The likelihood is that if Arthur existed, he held the court at Caerleon. And that was the Roman fortress of Isca Augusta. And there was a hill fort there. If you look at the 12th century Geoffrey of Monmouth text, he refers to Caerleon as Arthur's seat of power. No references to Camelot until much later. But I mentioned earlier, and I'll repeat it now, there is a very large round amphitheater at Caerleon. And if you consider the fact that Arthur was elected war leader 12 times for 12 different battles, a great place to hold a war council would have been in this big round amphitheater, which could eventually have evolved into this concept of the round table. And so I'm always hesitant to say, historically, because there is no historical consensus on the existence of Arthur. But there's a lot of little bits and pieces that at least lend some credence to it, and it makes us just wonder, was there some real figure behind these legends or not? So I read the excerpt that Nennius wrote about the battles. I'm not going to read it again. But Nennius wrote that Arthur fought in 12 battles. Nennius's work doesn't talk about the Battle of Camlann, where Arthur and Mordred killed each other. So that may have been an invention. It may have been an oversight. It may have been just that Nennius didn't want to write about that particular battle. But in any case, he